Well, actually, Claire's asked me a couple times if I'd like to come speak here on the topic of suffering. I said no for a while. Actually, I guess one way or another, kind of blew Claire off. And after Scott spoke a couple weeks ago, Claire asked me again last week if I wanted to do a follow-up at part 2 on why do bad things happen to good people. So I said yes. I didn't think about it a whole lot, but I said yes. Kind of disappointed that I missed Scott's story last week. I hear it was pretty powerful. No expert in suffering, but the one thing I've realized over the years is suffering draws us closer to one another, and I think it's a tool that God uses to bring us in touch with reality. It puts us on the same page as people. Softens our hearts. Just allows us to listen and to just be in tune with what people are going through. The question we ask a lot of times is why? Why is this happening? Why are bad things happening to good people? Or why would God even allow something like this to happen? Well, I don't have the answer to that, but I can tell you I've been there on numerous occasions, and for one in particular that I'm going to share about today. I don't really, speak of this story a whole lot. Some people that know me now might not even know this story took place, but my hope is that next couple minutes that you guys will be blessed by it and encouraged as well. So I was born in Grand Rapids. Great family, great parents. Grew up in a Christian school. Never really had any, trials in my life. No suffering that I could think of. Never was in want, never needed anything. Pretty comfortably, I could say. But looking back, I realized that being comfortable doesn't always make someone happy and doesn't keep us in tune with reality. Well, that was me, and by the beginning of high school, pretty much all that I cared about was myself. I was living basically free of cares, free of worries. I had some great friends. I had some great girlfriends too at the time. Matter of fact, one memory that came to mind when I was thinking about this is I remember my principal my freshman year came up to me and about halfway through the year told me I was on a fast track to get kicked out of the school because I was accumulating so many detentions. But I just didn't really care. That was just me. Well, sophomore year, life got a little bit better. I made some good friends. I had a steady girlfriend that I liked, and the year went by pretty well. I had a car, I had a job. I was pretty much independent as far as I could tell. I could do my own thing. I thought I had life all figured out. Probably nothing bad could happen to me, I thought. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case. Life as I knew it got turned upside down the end of sophomore year. A bunch of friends of mine and I headed out to the DeGraff's cottage the last day of school just to have some end of the year fun. Nothing too crazy, just looking forward to the summer. Well, I had a good time out there. not a care in the world, just looking ahead towards next year. I don't remember a whole lot about that evening, but I remember my girlfriend that I had, her name was Melissa. We decided to head back early that evening before everybody else. We both had to work in the morning. So called our parents, let them know that we were on our way, and off we went. A few miles down the road, came to an intersection, and we were broadsided by another vehicle. I don't know why, but God decided to take Melissa home. He allowed me to live through it. Next few hours, I was in and out of consciousness, still trying to figure out what had happened. I was airlifted to Spectrum downtown, put in the ER. I still don't remember a whole lot, but one thing I can remember is my dad coming in, and he's the only person that I remember that was there, and he told me that Melissa had died. And I just cried and cried and cried. I spent just shy of a week in the hospital, feeling like this was just some kind of bad dream, questioning why this would happen, and if God had forgotten about me. I had grown up in the church, and like I said, had a great family, but had no clue how to deal with this kind of thing. How could I even wrap my mind around this? Melissa was a great girl, had a great family. She loved God. Her family loved God. How could God allow something like this to happen? Why was her life cut so short? I spent the next 3 months, I think, the loneliest that I've ever been. It was summer, the time when we should be having fun, not worrying about school. It was like a deep fog of sadness. I had no car, no license. I didn't feel like seeing anyone. Sure, I received plenty of cards and visits from friends, but it seemed like nobody else knew how to deal with something like this either. All summer long, I carried the weight and the guilt of causing another family so much grief. Wondering how they could ever forgive me. I wonder what I would do if I were them. Asking for that forgiveness was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I can remember driving out to their cottage in Sandy Pines in August of 2002, just a few months after this happened, knowing that the only reason that we were meeting is so I could tell them that I was sorry. Well, it wasn't easy, but I know that Melissa's family did forgive me. They showed me more kindness than I could have ever imagined. As they showed me grace, God began to show me his grace, to bring me his truth and to bring me out of this deep sadness. He sent people to me to walk with me, speak the truth that I needed to hear. People to remind me that I wasn't forgotten. Well, it's almost 13 years later now. I still don't have the answer to why or a lot of my questions. But I learned that God's not afraid of our questions. He's not afraid of our doubts. And he wants to walk with us through it all. My hope is that this morning we can maybe wrestle with some of those questions if we have them. Come out with a foundation to stand on, not just for ourselves, but to help others walk with us through these questions. Claire's going to come up, and he's got some questions that he'd like to ask. And
thank you, Jordan. Yeah. Well, let me tell you about some questions his friends asked about God. So this happened at our cottage. We had about 40 of his classmates out there. And someone had driven past the crash site and said, I think Jordan's been in an accident. The police are there. So I went about a mile away, and I knew what intersection they were talking about. Jordan had already been taken away, and Melissa had not. So I talked to the police officer, and I said, I think I know who the driver of that car is, and they knew because they had the personal effects. And I said, Melissa and Jordan. He says, yes. So the police officer came back to the cottage with me, and I had to gather all of their friends together and tell them that their classmate just died and that Jordan was headed to the hospital. You can imagine what a chaotic night that was. Kids wondering, what is up with that? Well, I didn't try to preach any sermons. This is a time to simply be sad, and that's fine. It's not try to spin God or to make something good out of it at that point. So we didn't, and we gathered together, we prayed. Just for your information, one of the things that really surprised the officer was there was no alcohol involved. Mm-hmm. He said, because this is 99% of the time there's alcohol involved, and so there was nothing. It's a tricky 5-way stop that if you don't know it, a car can come. I've almost been hit myself a few times, and so the kids called their parents. I said, you ought to call your parents, have them come and pick you up. And one of the worst moments for me was getting a call from Melissa's parents. We haven't heard from Melissa. We heard you've asked all the parents to come pick their kids up. What's going on? And the police officer said, please do not tell them, because there's somebody on the way to the house, a chaplain, to their house right now. And it was like, oh, that was... So fast forward, and one of the things that you didn't mention this morning, but that once the Bransons knew that their daughter had died, I think they came up that night to the hospital.
I remember they called me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to make sure you were
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Which is unbelievable. I don't know if I could be that gracious. So a few weeks later, we had the funeral, and you have to know something about Melissa. She was an amazing woman. She loved God. Of anybody you ought to just give the finger to God on, this is, Melissa's one of them. She was just amazing, way over your pay grade. Everybody knew her to be a wonderful person. And I didn't know Jordan at all, really. Because Jordan was a class younger than Melissa was. So 2 weeks later, our house tended to be kids central. We had students over all the time. So my wife and I went to bed. There were a couple of dozen students in our basement, and my son comes up about a half an hour later. I'm sound asleep and says, "Dad, the kids want to talk to you." I said, "Okay." So I wiped my bed head down and got dressed and went down. And, "Okay, what's the issue?" "Well, Mr. DeGraff, why do bad things happen to good people?" I said, "Like what?" And they were just incredulous. They looked at me and "Well, like Melissa died." I said, "Let me just say this. Some terrible things happened to Melissa's family. Some terrible things have happened to Jordan, to you, their friends, to the school, the people, relatives, everybody. This was a tragedy that it's almost something you can't even comprehend. But what makes you think something bad happened to Melissa?" "Well, she's dead." What have you learned in church and in Christian schools all of your life about what God promises those who love Him once they die? "Well, I know that, but." I said, "Well, that's not a but. That's the crux of it." I said, "Do you believe that Melissa is less happy today than she was 2 weeks ago?" "Well, that's probably true." "Now I need to hear conviction in you. I need you to process this and think this." I said, "I think that God is actually surprised how tenaciously we hang on to life." In fact, I gave this illustration that I'd actually given at my mother-in-law's funeral. I said, just imagine a young kid, a young Jewish kid, brought to a concentration camp when he was 3. And we don't, the war actually lasted much longer than America was in it. And so he's lived there for 5 or 6 years. This is the only life he knows in the concentration camp. And the Allies come along and said, "We're going to set you free and bring you to Switzerland, or your family, we're going to find them and bring them too if we can possibly find them." And the kid goes, "No, not Switzerland. This is the only life he knows. This is familiar to him." They literally have to get him kicking and dragging on the truck to go off to Switzerland, and he gets there, and there's clean water and sunshine and food and a clean bed. And sure enough, his parents show up a day or two later, or a week or two later, and he cannot believe he did not want to go to Switzerland. Because he didn't actually even know that Switzerland existed when he was 3. But I said to these kids, you have been taught all of your life that God promises after death something better than this life. Compared to all eternity, this is just a bad afternoon. Now, having said that, the question I have is, why would he take somebody like Melissa, who is so spiritually mature, so alive as a Christian? I mean, it seems to me that she's got a lot of usage for God in this life. And that was appeared to me to be cut short. So that's the question I have. Not that something bad happened to her, but why God would take out somebody who is such an amazing woman of God and leave a bunch of us around. That, that makes no sense to me. So obviously we spent the next 3 hours, literally till about, I think it was like 2 o'clock, and I finally said, you guys need to get home because your parents are going to think you got kidnapped or something. So, but there was a variety of discussions after that. And Jordan and I really didn't talk, I don't think, for years afterwards. And then Jordan got involved in the ministry my daughter and son-in-law were involved in, and the Stockbridge Boiler Room, and actually lived in community with them for several years. So I thought I would give you at least that, the second half of the story from the kids' perspective. But frankly, the kids were not buying what I was selling. Not all the kids were buying. It still seems like this is a wrong thing to do. I understand. I cannot explain why God allows these things to happen. But you just need to know that nothing bad is happening to Melissa right now. If she were not a believer, that question would have more significance, would have serious significance. But she is, and you can take comfort in that. And if not, you might as well go out and hit a bucket of balls on Sunday morning rather than going to church. Because if you don't believe God's promises regarding salvation and hope and eternal life, what is the point? So I'm going to open up to questions for Jordan, I assume, primarily, and then we're just going to have a discussion on suffering and what that looks like later on, once we get questions from Jordan out of the way. Any questions?
Jordan, can you just kind of describe your journey over the next year or two? You're still a junior in high school.
Yeah.
Dealing with this. And how did you get supported through that? How did you do through that? Was that a terribly tough time? Did you see any light at the end of the tunnel during that period?
Not initially, no. Like I said, I think that first summer was the hardest. I didn't have any answers, really. It helped a lot being surrounded by people who maybe didn't have the answers either, but were willing to walk through it with me. I can think of a couple teachers specifically at the school who constantly were checking in on me, making sure that I was doing okay. Think of friends specifically who really invested a lot of time, a lot of extra time with me throughout those first few months and even that first year. I think one of the other big challenges was after going through this, a lot of people looked at me, I think, like I should have the answers, or maybe expecting me to have some words to kind of express what I was going through, but I didn't. It really took a lot of time. Took a lot of healing, a lot of just digging into God's word too, and finding truths to build a foundation for my life. I didn't really have that even growing up in church and in a Christian school. Didn't have much of a foundation of how to deal with these things, how to answer these tough questions. And so I guess the biggest thing was that I'm thankful for is the people that God had put in my life during that time.
Jordan, if you're to piggyback on that, talk about people like Canaan walk. What does that look like? And how do we walk with somebody that's going through that? Is it just time? Is it listening? It's probably not giving the answers.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
How do we minister? People are going through tough times like that.
Yeah, I think it might look different for each person, but I'll tell you the first major impactful thing that somebody did for me is during that nearly a week that I was in the hospital, one of my friends who was a good friend, but probably not one of my best friends, stayed in the hospital with me. Pulled up a couch or chair, whatever was in there, and I didn't ask him to. He just did. He just sat with me, and I don't think I realized how much that helped until years later. A matter of fact, it was probably 5 or 6 years later, and I thought of that, and it just overwhelmed me. Like I haven't done that even for anybody else, but this guy was willing to just sit with me and cry with me and walk with me through this. Yeah.
Were there some people that just couldn't look you in the eye when you came back to school the next September, or in church, that you just felt they didn't know what to say, so they just turned their eyes away? Did you sense that kind of thing at all?
Yeah, I did. I think that was a lot of what I was afraid of going back to school to my junior year, is not knowing how to interact with people after that. And I did. I felt that. I think that I felt that even, it was tough feeling that even from some teachers too. Not in a bad way at all, but they just didn't know how to deal with this. And I think I kind of expected that also. On the same point, I didn't really either. There was a lot of points where I felt ashamed and guilty, and so I didn't have much to say either.
I was talking to Scott a number of months ago because I had cancer 31 years ago, and people don't know what to say to you. They just, some of these platitudes. At one time, I blogged on the things you should never say at a funeral. Well, I'm sure God needed Melissa more than he needed her. What a bunch of, that is not helpful at all. Or all things work together for the good. They do not need little Bible verses or anything. Just to look somebody in the eye and say, I'm sad for you, is probably the most important thing. People don't know what to say. And so literally, one of the things I want to urge you to do today, as you're driving away today, think specifically about how you would react differently if you knew Jordan and this had happened and you'd come on him 3 weeks later. What would you say? What would you do? For everything from eye contact to whatever, prepare yourself for that day, because there's some tragedy about to happen to some friend or relative, or to a family of some friend or relative, that we need to prepare ourselves and think about how can we handle this better. Because the Christian community shouldn't be just averting eyes because you don't know what to say.
Sure.
Now, some people it's easier. I'm an extrovert, so it's probably easier for me, and you're not. And so that's why you haven't talked about this thing. But we need to think about this because, for someone to come up to Jordan, what are the kind? I'm not going to answer that question. What are the kinds of things that would have been helpful for you? I mean, this friend came up and stayed in. Did he talk to you about this? Did he let you talk? Is it just cathartic? What kinds of things might have helped?
I think it's exactly that. People just to listen, and I know when I was in that point, I didn't really have much to say, anyways. But I wanted to know that people were there and that people cared. And I think that's the biggest thing is just to know that you're willing to spend time and to go out of your way to make, almost in a sense, make yourself uncomfortable so that you can bring that comfort to somebody.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Jordan, could you talk a little bit about, I know you're married, getting married, falling in love, and kind of coming from that past and having that event in your life, and kind of what marriage did for you. Was that comfort? How did that work with your wife?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I struggled with for a lot of years, especially in high school, especially with people who knew me well and people that knew Melissa really well. I think I almost felt guilty dating anyone again. It helped after a few years. I was really encouraged by a lot of even Melissa's friends and family who just showed me a ton of grace and were even willing to approach me and say, don't be don't be afraid to move on with your life. I can remember her dad and I would go to lunch maybe twice a year or so. He'd meet me up for lunch, and he would always remind me that they want the best for me, and that to not be afraid to keep moving forward. And so that helped a lot. I think it helped knowing that I had that grace from people. And when I met my wife too, one of the first things that we did was share our story, share where we had been, and so I shared that with her, and just to know that she didn't think of me differently in a sense, but that she understood that the pain that I walked through was huge, and was a huge just release for me to be able to begin to grow my trust in her. Yeah, that's a great question.
Anyone else? Yeah, Bob.
One of the things I'm kind of relearning this morning is, the great escape. Somebody's having difficulty, and you're like, hey, man, let me know if I can help you. Just let me know, I'll be there. We need to be smart enough to be there without the invitation. And so the kid who pulled up a chair or a couch in your room at the hospital did the great thing. Just his presence, being available whenever you were awake, whatever. But in our daily lives, we hear about things all the time, and we give this 2-cent business of, hey, give me a call. They're like you're the service master guy. And I think as Christian men, just need to be smarter than that. We need to know that somebody's wounded, hurting, etc., and we just clear our calendar a little bit.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Jordan, you didn't say much about your parents to this. What was that relationship like? How did they minister to you, or as a parent, what would you learn that maybe you would do different?
I think they were really the ones who got me through it. I can't even think of specifics that they did, but it was just the grace and the understanding that I felt from them was incredible. I mentioned too that during this time I didn't have a car anymore. My license got taken away for 3 months. So I remember every day after school, they'd pick me up, they'd drive me to school, and they'd bring me to work. And never once did they ever complain, ever make me feel sorry, make me feel guilty for this. They just did it. I think exactly what Bob was saying too. They didn't ask any questions. They were just there, and really, I think set a good example for what I'd like to be someday too.
Do you still have a relationship with them today, now that you've moved on with life and married? Do you see Melissa's parents?
To be honest, I haven't seen her mom in a while. I think she's the one who was impacted the most. It's been a while since I've seen her dad, and I think we still have a good relationship. But after I got married, right before I got married, in one way or another, he kind of told me he doesn't want to make my wife feel uncomfortable, and I don't think that he would in any means, but I understand that. And to answer your question, it's been a while since I've seen them, but the relationship's still there and it's still strong. Yeah.
So Bob Spratt and I have somebody that we've known, and Brian Seckma also, for many years, a guy named Robert Walgamuth, whose wife, and I'm guessing 60, something like that. His wife just died from cancer about a year ago. And, she was just an amazing woman. And she gave him a great gift. She said, Robert, I want you to be happy, and so does God. And so she told the whole family, I want you to begin dating and get married as soon as God provides a woman for you. And I want you to feel guilty about it. I don't want you to wear sackcloth and ashes for a year. You don't have to do this. I'm gone. I'm with God. I'm fine. You take care of yourself. That kind of permission is huge to give to people. And we aren't always in that position, because if it's a tragedy, you can't do that. But I would love to have thought, in a sense, her father gave you permission. It's okay.
Yeah.
He didn't say that outright, but if you're in that kind of situation, what an amazing gift to give someone. Don't worry about guilt. Should I not date for 6 years or 5 years or, all this kind of thing? Set someone free from that.
Yeah.
One time, I started doing prison ministry. I think, Brian, you did too, years and years ago. And I got frustrated, frankly, because I would go to the prison, and all I do is hear these the inmates complain about bad food, not enough weights in the gym, and I'm going, here's what I wanted to say. Are you kidding? It's costing me $33,000 a year to get people like you in here, and you're just whining because you have no food. Here's a thought: don't do the crime. And so before I had a meltdown, I just gave up that ministry and realized I didn't have the kind of talent. The point is that within the prison system, there's a sense of injustice that we look on the outside and go, how in the world could they actually think that way? But they actually do. I think that one of the why do bad things happen to good people is that I think God sits outside of all this and says, is DeGraff whining again? Are you out of your mind? Look at this beautiful day I gave him. He's got 67 years of life. He's got meaningful employment, and he's whining. I'm just glad he doesn't give up on us, because our sense of what's right and wrong and just and unjust is so different. I think this world is like a big prison camp. We just think it ought to all be better. We ought to wake up like the Truman Show, cue the birds in the morning. Every day ought to be perfect in sunshine. And it's like, oh my gosh, where did we get that notion from? And so I found it's helpful for me when bad things happen to me to get a perspective on. And that there's people that say, well, just count your blessings. Well, that seems like a trite little thing, but that actually has been helpful. The fact that the prisoner, if they actually thought about the fact that I do get what they refer to as 3 hots and a cot, that, that it's not raining on me, I'm not homeless, I'm going to school, I'm making license plates or whatever it is that they do, but that we actually think about what God has actually given us. And that's why this video this morning was important, because, hallelujah, most of us have got an incredible life, both ahead of us and behind us. And it is easy to pick and say, but why didn't you fix this? Any comments on that or anything else? This morning I got up, we'll finish up in about 3 minutes. This morning I got up and watched the news about San Bernardino. And I'm thinking, there's got to be people here who've got questions like me. Why in the world would a good God allow that kind of completely senseless? And I don't know necessarily, but we tend to lay those kinds of things on God like mad. And I could imagine on the way down, I had a little dialogue with God, or what I think would have with me. Claire, let me get this straight. So you live in a country that is actually against the law to teach kids about me in school, to teach my moral laws, to actually pray. There's no serious attempt at gun control because you have a First Amendment, which I didn't write, and you're complaining to me about choices people make? Really? I mean, God has given everybody, it says in Romans, everyone a conscience, that there is a sense of right and wrong to everybody. You got God codified laws that says, here's my constitution on how to live. Here, if you do these things, you can save yourself 90% of the senseless suffering in this world. I mean, just think about it. If everyone actually obeyed the 10 Commandments, we would have no need for police, locks, lawyers. I mean, you can't even imagine what life would be like. So he says, don't whine to me about the fact I've given you all the information you need. You've made the choices that you've made. Now, that doesn't necessarily explain why some person is dead in a morgue today in San Bernardino. Why them as opposed to someone else? I don't have answers to that. But God is not without provision, and says, I've taught you better than that. And then I had this last thing as I was coming to the door this morning, this memory from years back. There was a father of a kid who went on a killing rampage in a high school. I'm not even sure where it was. And the people, his neighbors, made his life so miserable that he had to move to another city. And I'm thinking, really? This guy seemed like a good guy, at least on the interviews. Seemed like he raised his kid right. His son was out of the house, was in the mid-20s or something like that, living on his own, did this terrible thing, but everyone blamed the father for the crime of the son, when he had nothing to do with it whatsoever. He said, I raised him right. I brought him to church. I taught him right from wrong. I think we have the same thing with God sometimes. We blame the father for the sins of the children when he's done everything he could reasonably do to help us understand right from wrong. So I'm sorry I didn't mean to preach, but Brian.
My wife is very black and white. And I said a couple weeks ago, the title of the thing was, why do bad things happen to good people? And she said, that's easy. There are no good people. And that's really, that's kind of a truth also.
You didn't take that personal, did you?
No. We live in a fallen world. Why do we expect, we think we're good? Who's defining who's good? It's true.
Wow, that's a good, I hadn't heard that. That's a great question.